Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whatever time zone it is, wherever you in the world, it is your Lord and Saviour. And today we're going to be focusing on Vampire the Masquerade First Edition, because as you may be aware, this year has kind of been an exploration or an appreciation of Vampire the Masquerade First Edition. I did a very fun unboxing, unwrapping video earlier this year that's going to appear on a card somewhere in this space up there, where I sort of considered that to be like the holy grail of vampire relics and treasures. It's so difficult to find like original second-hand copies online, but I managed to find on eBay because somebody was mis-selling it second edition. The fucking idiot. But going through that core book, it's very raw, and it definitely had a very passionate vibe, and I actually want to try and run it. And I'm working on a couple projects at the moment which are probably going to be out by the time that this video comes out, so do check out the cards and videos that are going to appear at the end of the video to get some experience with my experience of Vampire the Masquerade First Edition. And this is happening in two parts on the channel. The first part is just running a Vampire the Masquerade First Edition chronicle of my own design that sort of like touches upon the various different 90s themes, like the goth punk era. Like, it's going to be lots of combat, it's going to be moody, it's going to be dark, it's going to be set in Chicago. And again, I'm talking about this in the present tense because I haven't done that. In fact, the first game is actually going to be happening the week of the 14th of July 2025 in the year of our Lord Telos, which is the day that I'm recording this episode, just to give like a proper time perspective on that. And players are going to be like making their own characters, and for that one I am limiting the clan choices to what's just in the core book, just to keep things super straight and simple. There's going to be no distractions and no like which of these are many bloodlines are going to run. And then the other part to this is that I'm going to be converting the 5th edition adventure, The Sacrifice, which of course 5th edition is the latest edition of Vampire the Masquerade as of recording the video, and converting it to see how well it converts into the 1st edition setting, again using Chicago by Night 1st edition and other bits and pieces for that. And I'm going to open up the doors for other player options for that as well, which means I've had to buy a whole array of source books. I have bought the Storyteller's Handbook because it involves some clans and bloodlines. Admittedly, most of them are the more antagonistic ones, but I think the one that's the most playable of that are the Gargoyles. Hunters Hunted has the Children of Osiris, which I think is so fucking funny. It's like, I didn't realise that the Children of Osiris were that old in Vampire the Masquerade history. I thought it was like an early 2nd edition thing, but it just made me laugh because I love the bloodline. I know they're not a very popular one, and it sort of works rather nicely into the stereotype cheese of like the heroes of the vampire setting, because they're kind of like the closest thing to a good guy. But in my lore dive of them, which again is going to appear up there somewhere, there are ways of twisting them round so they can actually be quite devious. But we're not talking about the Children of Osiris or that book or the Storyteller's Handbook. We're actually going to be talking about the other player option, the Player's Guide, which has most of the clan and bloodline options from the core book, which I will be talking about in this review. And the reason why I actually want to do a review of this, and then the Storyteller's Handbook, which will be like not too far down the line, is that this by the way, a print-on-demand copy, so it's quite a chunky book. The Storyteller's Handbook that I have is a original print, which I'll talk a bit more about in that specific episode, and I have a PDF of Hunters Hunted. But in this, I was quite surprised by how chunky this book is, so I can only imagine just how chunky like an original print of the Player's Guide for Vampire the Masquerade First Edition is. But as I was reading through this, I was genuinely surprised, almost taken aback, by how much useful information that could still be applied to more recent games. So if you're playing like V20 or even 5th edition, there is information in here that you can take with you and incorporate into more modern games. And I'm actually going to confidently say that you should be using this for those modern games. And I think it's going to be the only player's guide that you're ever going to need with any edition of Vampire the Masquerade, and that is a fucking huge ass claim. And I'm hoping by the end of this review, which is completely subjective of course, because all fucking reviews and opinions are subjective, you'll be swayed a bit more to try out and using the 1st edition player's guide, or at least have a better appreciation of it if you own it already and do use it, or just admire it from your bookshelf. So this book, as I said, is a print-on-demand copy from Drive-Thru-RPG. The quality is consistently inconsistent in that the print inside the book is like that very standard like 1st edition material stuff where you don't have any like the classic borders. You've got like the classic black and white artwork. it's just 2 columns, like some John Cobb stuff there, which is fantastic. Joshua Timbrook's art is like really at its finest with the first and early second edition stuff, like excluding the Chicago by Night stuff. As iconic as they are, I don't like it, but with here, it's a bit more expressive and it's not just some vague interpretations of like some character portraits. They work really fucking well. However, the exception to that is on page 109, where we have a Nosferatu with a swastika on its forehead. Yeah, I get it, it's like 90s edgy, but for fuck's sake, like, if you're gonna do that only clans, put it on the fucking, like, fascist venture head, for fuck's sake. Like, jokes aside, there is, like, no fucking need for that, like, that's just fucking cringe in my opinion. But anyway, going back to the overall quality, as I was saying, like, it's very clear and concise. Like, you can see that it's a scan in some places if you're really paying attention and looking for those specific flaws, or you just have a negative bias and just, like, have a fucking hate hard on for drive-through RPG, which I know some people do, but, you know, it doesn't bother me too much because I can read it, it's clear enough. So I'm very happy with the quality overall, and I know that some of the books do fall apart from Drive RPG, but so far this one has stayed in mostly one piece. Now, the inconsistent bit here is that it being a scan shows its wear the most by looking at the front and especially the back cover. Like, I can even see from here where I know the camera quality isn't fantastic with the glare and the light and how it's like not super close, but that is just fucking gross. Like, that's where you get the idea the best, where it's a scan. And I've never been particularly fond of this artwork here. It's very cheesy, like the bloodstained hair, the burning motorcycle a little bit. Like, it does portray some element of like a gothic punk environment, but I don't think this really sells Vampire the Masquerade a lot. And a fun fact, this particular art piece was going to be the original cover of Vampire the Masquerade, according to the Amazon documentary that came out a few years ago, which, yeah, I'm very glad they didn't go with that, because you can imagine just how much of a fucking flop that would have been from the artwork as well, because despite the expression, we do judge books by their covers, and I do think it's funny that there have been many instances of, like, White Wolf / World of Darkness, like, insisting on using a shit piece of artwork. Like, I've often critiqued the the Hunter the Reckoning 5th edition 2 covers, which are just going to pop up on side by side of each other, because, like, ew, nasty. But they, despite the kickback with, like, the really crappy image, which is basically a bunch of cleaners and their mate Iggy Pop, they put it in the back of the core book. So they were determined to use it, even though they said they weren't going to use it, and people really didn't like it. So, anyway, moving on. So let's actually talk about what's inside the book. Well, on the first page, beyond the content, it's the standard World of Darkness introductory chapter of what it aims to cover and what you'll find inside. Again, it has a very different style and feel to it, because it's like talking directly to the reader rather than some of the more gothic prose and poise that we are used to seeing with World of Darkness books. And it is literally a page telling the reader that this isn't going to be the more narrative, emotional stuff that we put out with our other books. This is just going to be a big old toolbox for players to use as much or as little as they want. I can't appreciate that, because it's like sets up very clearly and bluntly what to expect and not what to expect. Now, would I be happy if it did that with every single book that it did? No, because it would kind of lose its character, as I feel some of the 5th edition books have started to do. But that's a different conversation for a different time. But I like it that in this very first instance here, even with such a dramatic piece and the short bit of fiction that would follow after this, which is a very weird placement, I have to say, it's appreciated. So, you know, it sets an expectation of, like, this isn't going to be the most deep and informative bit of writing that you're going to find here. That being said, what follows is like a sort of Hunter perspective rehash of, like, what is a vampire in their society you would find within the core book, which again is also very similar to what you would find in a load of other Vampire the Masquerade core books. And as I said, this has the perspective of the hunters, so they don't know everything, so it puts things on a much more grounded level for players to appreciate and to come into, and not being overwhelmed with the new terminology, especially as it touches upon some of the new clans and bloodline that's found within this book as well, so it teases about some of the exciting things that are going to come. And I can only imagine what that must have felt like, because I don't know, like, how this stuff would have been updated with fans. Obviously, like, newsletters and emails wasn't really a thing then at this point. So it was really just relying on, like, the word of mouth and, like, what would be happening in the local game store for them to convey this information. And again, newsletters and ads in the backs of books of things. So I can only imagine, like, the intrigue when they're seeing, like, these new clans and a bloodline appear. and then reading about it in full. Like, I feel that must have been a very exciting time for Vampire fans, especially with how successful the first edition was, with all these other really cool elements in there. Despite some of the flaws that I will mention with here, it does add a lot of diversity with the World of Darkness, which has always been a great selling point. You know, it hasn't always worked because of certain issues, which, again, some of which I'm going to talk about here, but I'd much rather a company would attempt to do good and fuck up, rather than just be disrespectful and rude and not even try, you know? So after all of that, it launches into the second chapter, because that bit of fiction is apparently the first chapter, and the second chapter is character creation, which is the more crunchy elements of this, and not something I'm going to spend a lot of time on, purely because, especially if you're playing V20, which I suspect a lot of you are, and Revise, and it's stuff that you have seen before, stuff that isn't going to be terribly useful now, because some of it is like first edition centric. Like, it starts off with 7 templates, one for each clan of the core book, and it's all fairly standard, bog standard stuff. There isn't any for the cative, which is annoying, and there aren't any templates for the clans and bloodlines that will be featured in the book later on. And I understand that it wouldn't make much sense putting like the new clan options with the rest of the templates, because we don't know anything about them yet. But it would have been nice, like, at that later point in the book, there would be like a little template for people to use. Like with second edition, you'd have like the clan concept, and then in the corner of one of the pages, you have like a little you'd have a template that would be based on the image that's on the screen, like for you to bend and twist however you please. I'm a bit annoyed that it didn't do that. There's a missed opportunity, I feel, just to help players like get into the mindset a bit more after being presented with this bit of information about them. But the templates that we have here are serviceable and stereotypical. Like the Gangrel, like, hates people, loves animals, and wanders about a lot. The Brujar is a gangster. The Nosferatu skulks about a lot. Although that Nosferatu has 5 stamina, which is a bit weird because it's the only character that has 5 dots on anything. And if anybody turned up with 5 dots of anything, unless there was a very specific reason as to why they were doing that, I wouldn't allow it, because it just seems like they're cheating the system a little bit. Also, the 5 dots and the stamina doesn't match with the concept, I feel. I feel that's just something that went there because reasons. And of course the Malkavian is a fucking psychopathic killer that fucking tortures people and animals, which, yeah, I get it, it's first edition, the Malkavians and the Mad Clan, fish milk, blah blah blah, but if anybody turned up in a game with a Malkavian concept like that, I wouldn't allow it unless it was somebody I really trusted, and there was a very specific reason why they wanted to use that very specific concept here. Like a dual personality like Jekyll and Hyde thing, but then again, such an idea has been done to death. But point is, I wouldn't really allow such a concept in a game. And again, it was the 90s, different environment, but it was the beginning of people not really liking Malkavians because they were just portrayed as being fucking mad nutters. One thing I do like about all the character concepts, even with the Malkavian, that there's a little advice like how to develop them further, like such and such has got low willpower, such and such has got this, tweak this, do that. Like, it gives a load of helpful suggestions, so it's a very flexible template, which I like. It really encourages the player to not just take what's written, like to have fun with them, like to make things better, or to use that as an element of like roleplay. Like, you could keep a character with like a low bit of willpower and then like just add that to the roleplay. Like, I think that's a really cool fucking thing, especially for the early 1990s. The chapter ends with a load of merits and flaws, which, if you own V20, you have probably seen most of these before. Although, that being said, some of them do have different write-ups, and some of them are far more brutal than what you would find in V20. Particularly, to use an example, Nightmares is something that's a lot more vicious than it is in V20, and I'm using that because there's one player in the aforementioned vampire game that I'm running that was debating picking that. But what the difference is, I'll let you go and read those at your own leisure. There are some different ones, and there's some newer ones, and the way that they're divided up makes a bit more sense. Like, some of them are focused on kindred relations, some of them are focused on kind relations, and some of those are unique to the core book as well. Some of them are supernatural and some of them aren't. Like, it divvies them up a bit more rather than just like the physical, mental, supernatural stuff, which can just seem a bit bland. And there's of course always the argument that some of the flaws you could just use as a role-playing thing. Like, I remember there was one particularly aggressive member of the Law by Night Discord server who was like an avid supporter of the V5 cause, as it were, who didn't like the V20 just because of its overbloat of merits and flaws, which, to be fair, that is very much an issue. It's like, well, you don't need a flaw to be not wearing glasses or to be deaf, which, fair enough, but do think it's nice to have those options there for people to take or to ignore as they so wish, so it becomes a literal core component of the character. You know, the pros and cons of all these things, of course. The third chapter expands and carries on the character creations process, and I say it like that because the third chapter is actually called The Expanded Character. I am so funny. And it starts off with secondary abilities, because if you have a look on the character sheet for first edition, it's very similar to V20 in second and revised, that you have the name stuff at the top, the attributes, the abilities, the advantages, but in like the bottom left hand corner you have these secondary abilities that serve as other traits, where if you have a certain ability that doesn't fit within the main abilities, you can just sort of write it there, or if you have a ritual you can write them down there as well. But in the book, a lot of the examples that are provided with the templates are actually these secondary abilities. So if I just read like a couple of them out of you, let's open it on a random page, like you've got one for climbing, you've got some for debating, falconry, journalism, hypnotism, jeweler, first aid, carpentry, camouflage, there's one for skiing, I recall somewhere, acrobatics, like there's loads to choose from that can really like hone in on what makes your character unique, and I like all those options are provided. But the issue that these have, that they can either be so specific that they can only work in very unique circumstances, like the skiing one I just mentioned, like how are you going to work that into a chronicle? A games master will do so, like it can be a bit forced I suppose, but some of them could also just be specialties. You could argue that cooking could be a crafting specialty. Let's find another one. Pottery. Like, craft usually entails like all the arty-farty making stuff, and pottery could be included here. Photography could be another one. Orienteering, which is like a direction thing, that could be an alertness one. Like, again, it requires a bit of like stretching and bending to make things work. A pilot, you can operate a flying machine, end quote. That could be a specialty in drive. But then again, if you, for some weird reason, your character doesn't know how to drive, but they can operate a plane, like, should they have any dots in drive? Should that not just be a thing of itself? And I've used things like this before, because I do think it's absolutely necessary sometimes. Like, when I did my solo Wraith the Oblivion actual play, which is going to appear on the card up there now, as a nice little playlist for you to go and watch or listen to, my character was a skateboarder. And I had that as like a secondary talent, I believe it is, in 20th Anniversary Edition. And I did that because I have had players as an ST give me characters where they wanted to be a skateboarder, but they put that as a specialty as drive or as athletics. I just feel that's just really fucking weird. And no, just put it as its own separate thing, because skateboarding and bike riding and other things like that are very different from fucking driving. So just do that sometimes. Like, again, it all requires like a conversation between the player and the games master to make sure it all fits well. And if you have that character who was a ski instructor, and it's not going to work for your setting, maybe do something else. But then again, if they're embraced as a ski instructor, maybe there's like a very niche avenue that their sire could be controlling. Maybe the character like has a much grander control and like a sports center sort of thing, and that's just something that they deal with. So you could bend and twist them in really fun ways, but a lot of these could just be specialties. But again, I love the fact that the options presented there. And I'm actually going to refer to this in the future when I'm making characters. If I want something very specific and I can't find it in another book, I can just translate these to other games that I run within the World of Darkness, regardless of edition, which is really fucking cool, honestly. This chapter also includes expanded disciplines, which is basically disciplines from 6 and beyond, and it talks about the whole generational thing. And it's interesting that it presents it from the angle that players shouldn't be encouraged to have them, which is a fucking weird choice because it's included in the fucking player's guide to try and encourage people to do. But it does it from the angle of that we're giving them to you so you, the players, know what you are up against when you go toe-to-toe with an Elder or Methuselah. Which I think is such an interesting way to present that, because first of all, who the fuck's going to read that and actually take that on board? Well, given the fucking discourse between 5th edition and 20th Anniversary Edition players about V20 and older editions being power gaming, buggy messes, and then has a look about all the fucking powers of 5th edition, it hasn't really worked out that well. But it's interesting to see that you can have these powers, but there's going to be like a cost to them. They're very rare. Like, most elders and Methusas don't have access to these. They mention like level 10 options being a thing here, but like the antediluvians may have them, which I think is an interesting, like, to include that they may have them. That these are very huge world-altering events that the antediluvians themselves might not be powerful enough to have. But of course, if you're that group that wants to have Cain in the Chronicle, you can come up with all sorts of fun, wacky shit as well. But as one would expect, the Elder Powers, as they would soon later become, are very powerful, very buggy and broken. I use buggy as like a video game term here, but the balance is not quite great. But then again, these are the powers of Elders and Mufusas. Do you expect them to really confine to the mortal rules a lot more? And it kind of makes me appreciate some of the more rarer instances with the Chicago by Night writings and some of those old City by Night books, where some characters do have like a level 6 or 7 in a particular power, and it's keyed and unique to them. And it encourages storytellers primarily to come up with own ones of specific characters, which is really neat because it's sort of an influence that the vampire has over the blood, that it's able to tweak and personalize things a lot more, not like as a conscious thing, but like when we're talking about making vampire characters and choosing disciplines, we often encourage each other to choose the disciplines that make sense. Like a Malkavian, for example, that's like really shy and recluse, like it's probably going to be more apt with obfuscate. They may know of Auspex as well, just to listen out to people approaching them to bully them or something like that. They may not know Dominate or Dementation, depending on the edition that you're using. A Toreador may have a load of Auspex, to appreciate the fine artworks or things. Or if they're a Sinner, they might have a load of presents, just things like that. And I think that these Elder Powers and how they are worked, tweaked, explained, implied, inferred, whatever, with this writing here is a very interesting thing to find here. Again, it helps me to appreciate a lot more as a games master that I could really throw something quite horrific that the players have no idea what's going on. They may presume, what power did you use at the end of a session? It's like, no, I just made that fucking shit up because reasons, and I kind of like that as well. The book also expands upon thaumaturgy. It provides a lot more paths, and it provides a lot more rituals, which was a lot for first edition, but you would then find them in later editions of Vampire the Masquerade in other core books. V20 practically has all of them, and some source books as well would provide these revised variants as the years go by. So not totally useful for most games of V20. Although that being said, there are some rituals and some write-ups of the thaumaturgy paths that are different to V20, so if you want a slightly different flavour, or you want something that's a bit more stronger, buggy, whatever, you can use that as well. And I think it's just a nice option for first edition players, for whoever amongst you is still playing first edition, but besides myself, for some form of a social experiment. It's nice to have all those different expansions there, and yes, thaumaturgy and its rituals does get a lot of slack because there's just an over-excessive amount of them, but you present a magic clan that uses powerful blood sorceries as their main form of control. Why wouldn't there be a lot of different fucking powers out there? Because if they didn't have all of that, what fucking use would they have within the Camarilla and Vampire Society, would they be really good mages if they didn't have all these different spells under their control? No, I don't think so. Then we move on to chapter 4, which is Vampire Society, which is actually the part of the book that I actually feel is most useful for players now, regardless of edition. And in fact, the next 3 chapters I feel are pretty good as well, but I'm not going to be talking too much about those for reasons I'll touch upon in a moment. But this chapter, Vampire Society, is primarily Camarilla focused because that's what most people are going to be playing. That's the angle that pretty much every single fucking Vampire the Masquerade game wanting people to try and play. There is a lot of info to be had here. Harpies, role-playing status, whether you're a high status vampire to a low one, so a primogen to a neonate for a storyteller, or you are somebody who's gained a lot of great status because you've done a lot of cool things for the city, and the other way around, like a fledgling to the prince. How does that work? How do they interact with each other? It's a level of detail that I haven't seen in other books before, and I love the attention to detail for the player's guide, to really get the players to sink their teeth, pun intended, into the atmosphere and the vibe. yeah, you could argue that a lot of vampire games do act like street level gang warfare, which I think is probably the best way to be playing vampire a lot of the time, but you then deal with gangsters and ancient families and princes that have been around for hundreds of years, and of course with the expansion of the material you have a lot more information to work with. But when you read it, it really does help you to think, okay, I am this neonate that does have some influence and power over the mortal world, but I'm talking about somebody who, with a click of her fingers or just a raise of an eyebrow, can have me killed. I should be talking with them some decorum of respect, and they are going to talking with me with a shitload of disrespect. Like, it's a really cool thing to do, and again, the high status can just be like things that you do in the city, which it touches upon as well, the idea of clan status, and it explores a bit more about like the different clans and their political games in the cities, are what they will be doing like to hold on to survival, and their whole structure and their formation as well, which from the perspective of a much more experienced Vampire the Masquerade fan who's read like the lore of each different clan, who's looked at the clan books, who's looked at the lore of the clans, has looked to see what they've done with 5th edition, a lot of it doesn't really surprise me, and there's not a lot of new information there, although a lot of the more organised clans have meetings, and their meetings are presented by day, month by month sort of thing, so if you really wanted to be that anal about it, you could. Again, I just love the fact that all this information is there, so you don't necessarily have to worry about bringing like a clan book here, a source book there, unless you're looking for something specific, of course. But if you just wanted like an overall general look about that clan and how all of that works, you can just bring the player's guide, find the specific portion of the book that you wanted, and then you're just away with that, and you would know what the different clans would expect of you and what having a high status of that particular clan would entail. Yes, the revised Camarilla sourcebook, which I did a review of a year or so ago now, again, card up there somewhere, does this a lot better and expands this a lot more. But it gives you enough information to work with to come up with something creative as a player and as a games master. That being said, the information that's presented with all of this isn't exactly equal. Like, the Tremere and the Venture have the most information there, which is interesting because their write-ups in the 1st edition core book, I feel the ones that are the most lacking. So there was a lot of information that they wanted to do with and to cook with, but they provide that all in the player's guide for people to work with, which I think is a really fucking cool thing. And there are other sections in there that talks about how are they going to fight for power, like different rumours that you can throw in there just to spice things up, that you can take as like literal canon or as like story hooks as well for your players to run after as well, which also makes me wonder why that is presented in a player's guide than it is the storyteller's book. But that being said, a player could read that and they could assume a thing about their character concept, or they could base character concepts like that from those rumours themselves. Like, it provides so many options for creativities that, again, I'm just kind of taken aback by how much is in there for players to run wild with. The chapter also focuses on the presenting of the new clans and bloodline, but before I do that, before it goes into all that information, it talks about, in a little sidebar, about making new clans and bloodlines with unique disciplines. It doesn't provide you much tools on how to do that, but it's interesting that that's provided as an option, and I like it that it presents it as an idea, even though as a storyteller that's a whole fucking logistic nightmare trying to find the balance of things and essentially homebrewing and testing it on the fly. Time of Thin Blood will do something similar with the revised edition setting, as that's a revised edition book, where you could create new disciplines for Thin Bloods, which didn't make a lot of sense, and a lot of them would just end up tying in with already existing disciplines anywhere. And I also like it that with these clans and bloodlines, which of course have their own unique disciplines, it makes a point mentioning, and also with the creation of your own if you so wished, that these disciplines are hard to come by because they are unique to the specific clans and bloodlines. So only a caitiff would really have easy access to that just because of the nature of their blood. Anybody else would have to work for them particularly well. Of course, you would have to work for them as a vampire anyway, with a whole sucky off the wrist or neck sort of thing, and then like a favour and the whole boon prestation thing, which is also covered in this chapter really fucking well. I like it that it makes that point, so it doesn't create character concepts where you can just like mix and match the different disciplines that you want, which is, again, I would find that 5th edition has kind of failed at with how it handled the likes of Vicissitude and Obeer. And I know people don't like it when I take bashes at V5, but I love that game. I love its systems, but there's just a lot of criticisms to be had with how well the system was originally presented, but also how the system has taken itself into the future. But coming back to this first edition sourcebook, so what clans and bloodline are presented in this sourcebook? Well, we have the Assamites, the followers of Set, the Giovanni, the Ravnos, and the Salubri in that order. And if you have any level of experience with the Lore by Night podcast, listening to the lore dives I've done, or playing and reading Vampire the Masquerade, you're not really going to find anything new here. The clans and bloodlines have like tweaked weaknesses, most notably the Assamites and the Salubri. The Assamite have like a similar blood exchange curse thing that the Tremere do, but that's kinda in reverse. The followers of Set and the Giovanni have a similar sort of curse, and their presentation is pretty much identical to all of their iterations of the game. The Ravnos, unfortunately, is probably some of the worst depictions of their Romani Thai stereotypes I have seen in any of their writing, which is super fucking frustrating. I attempted tried to connect it to like a real world thing to add some diversity, but it makes a point saying that the families that they travel with and the rest of the Roma culture fucking hate them, which is a choice, I suppose, so it makes it even more difficult for you to fucking play them within your cultural setting. And the weakness that they have is also really fucking shit, because it just makes people fucking hate you more because you're just a snidey, sneaky little shit, which, given the fucking hate and the discrimination that the Roma people have already, yikes on trikes, people. Like, why? Do you want people to play the Ravnos? Well, apparently, clearly not. And I get wound up with this because I actually really like the Ravnos as a clan and a concept, and I like with the changes that would come to them to fix the issues. Like, they keep the Roma stuff as like, yeah, those that do all of that and like live up to the stereotypes of the Romas and the G-word slur that many people have an issue with. Like, they are the worst of us, where the true of us have India under our fucking thumb, and some of the representation there is actually a lot better, but alas, a lot of people don't like that, or they don't care. But it's such a shame that the very first instance of the Ravnos here, who are one of my favourite clans, are presented so fucking shit, you know? But it is what it is. And again, it's just really interesting to see that Salubri were introduced so early as this. And their weakness is it's the whole fucking following Golconda thing, and they can only feed on consenting individuals. And their weakness is just as equally difficult as the 5th edition iteration as well, which has been caused some kind of controversy and is rather infamous. It's just fucking borderline rude, honestly. Like, they get punished and penalised if they're not actively working towards Golconda, and it's a lot more difficult for them to fucking heal as well. Like, that's just fucking rude. Like, do you want people to play the Salubri? There would be some changes to make it a bit easier, and their lore would become very interesting and very core and integral. Not just to Vampire the Masquerade and the Tremere, and actually, but just the World of Darkness as a whole. But again, like, interesting concept, like, to have, like, a Golconda-focused clan, even though the Golconda has always been a bit fucking vague, and there's never been a core mechanic of, like, resolving a Golconda seeking vampire, which I think is a very good thing given how esoteric and spiritual that it is. But this was not the way, in my opinion. The next 3 chapters I'm just going to whiz on by because there isn't really a lot to talk about here, I feel. Although I could talk a lot about the 5th chapter, which is all about role-playing, which are essays done by the authors that talk about different elements of the role-playing, and I think these are just great. Not just for the 1st edition setting of Vampire, but there's actually just a lot of really cool, interesting role-playing and games master advice to be found out there. So I don't want to spoil that for you. I honestly want you to go and check that out in of itself. The following chapter is all to do with equipment, which some of them just make me laugh because I feel most of them are just guns and vehicles that the players can have. And I find it funny because, one, this could just be a source book in of itself, like equipment and like in a similar sort of vein that Artelson Games did with Cyberpunk 2020. Like, they had the big book of guns, which is going to appear up here somewhere now. They could have had like a book like that. I know they had a combat focus book, but they could have just like released that as a separate thing for like different weapons and vehicles and like resources, like price allowance sort of thing. But I feel it also could belong in an ST book for them to give out to their players. Okay, here are the stats to write down. Like, for example, there are grenades in there, which I'm only noting because I'm using grenades in the first edition game, like as a Nosferatu gangster, like to take quick, cheap shots at people. And I think it's funny that grenades are in there but not in the Storyteller's book, because I feel that with it being the 90s and then the noughties, that's the sort of thing that players would go and latch on to, where storytellers have a lot more painful and frightful ways to cause damage to their players. I just think what's included there and what's included in the Storyteller's theme is quite funny in that regard. And the chapter talks about like different haven types and sizes that players may want to consider having for their game. Some of them are quite large, so I think that's more like a storyteller tool like to drop into a game, which again I feel kind of weird, the fact that that's included in the player's guide but not the handbook, the storyteller's handbook as it would be called for first edition, which actually ties in quite nicely with the final chapter, Surviving, which is like the neonate's little survival guide, like when to feed, going back to your haven, like a lot of really basic like how to vampire one-on-one stuff that I don't really see with a lot of other books. And again, information that you can just take on into your vampire conversations for some roleplay, for general discussion themes, like little things to drop into as a game. And alongside the boons and prestation themes, which I've kind of jumped over a little bit, these elements would not really be explored as much fully detail as in the first edition book, one of the very first Vampire the Masquerade books as well. So if I just put my finger in that book there, there's like just over half or just under, I can't, it was about half of the book. It's like really useful information that you could take into your games regardless of the edition that you use. Like there's a lot of really cool themes that both storytellers and players can be using in their games, and it's honestly something that, as I've said already, I'm going to take more into my games and when I'm making characters or World of Darkness games. Like, is there a sort of specialty that they could be using that I could just have as an other trait? Are there things here that could become specialties? I'm going to have these things here as a reminder of the different types of boons to hand out to players, because we tend to like flip between minor and life boons as well. And it talks about a really interesting idea of exchanging boons to increase and decrease the power of vampires that way, which is a very interesting idea. Something that I was aware of because I did read about that very briefly in a different book. But the way that it talks about here with examples, it's like absolutely paramount for the whole social political element of Vampire the Masquerade. Like a lot of the politics comes in from that chapter and everything else that would follow. So I do strongly recommend that you get the first edition player's guide, because there is just so much information in here that wasn't really explored as fully in future books. You could tweak and play around with the merits and flaws presented in this book to get a different feel and a vibe within your games. You can take the templates and tweak them as well, because the really fun thing is, with most editions of Vampire the Masquerade, the stats and the way that you make characters is exactly identical. So you could just take a concept from here. I don't feel experienced enough or well enough to do a character because you might be under the weather. You may just ask your games master, hey, is it okay if I just choose one of these templates? Yeah, sure. So you've now got a book with some character concepts in it, rather than having to buy like different character concepts or like search online to see if anybody has made any that aren't just fucking generative AI slop. Like, there's so many different ways that you can play around and have fun with this book. And what was originally a purchase just to get a better understanding for first edition, and so I could tell my players confidently what would and wouldn't work, this has become a core part of my vampire arsenal now. Like, I'm super excited to be using this in vampire games and World of Darkness games and beyond. Like, get this book. It's a fucking banner. And if you don't want it as a print-on-demand thing because you think it's going to take up too much space, or you only want specific bits, that's fine. Buy the PDF from Drive-Thru-RPG as well, because you're going to find those bits of information there and just print out the specific pages that you want. Like, there's so many different ways that you can be using this book, and I think it's a fantastic resource, regardless of edition of Vampire the Masquerade, which is such, to me, a really weird thing to be saying for the first edition of the game, which would get a second edition almost a year afterwards, just because of how unbalanced things were, and things needed to be refined a lot more. Which, go and buy this book. Unless you've got this book already, and you can let me know in the comments below what you think about this book. Do you use this book in your games, or is it just something that looks nice on your library? And I suppose I should give you like a proper score about what I feel about this book, but I don't do out of 10 scores because they're subjectively pointless. I don't like that sort of rating thing, so I'm going to rate this book haunting out of 10, as that is just as helpful as a proper out of 10 score. I'm going to leave this book in the description for you to go and purchase with a special affiliate code, so when you purchase that book, it helps me out by giving me a bit of the money back from your purchase, so I can provide more content like this, give you more games and more books to talk about, and just basically more ways I can run and talk about the World of Darkness and Vampire the Masquerade to you. And it's really a win-win chicken dinner situation for you, because you get books, I get books, and you get free content and games, so it's really in your favour to be doing this. But I do understand that times may be hard, you may not be able to do all of that, or you may have this book entirely, may want to spend it on something else. That's fine. You can copy and paste the affiliate code in the description below, paste it into the URL of any drive-through-RPG book before you add it to the cart and you buy it, and that helps as well. But if you can't do any of that because times are hard, as I said already, and then got distracted, that's fine, because you know, I don't expect people to be doing this. It would be nice if they could, but I'm not going to lose sleep if you are unable to do that for whatever reason or another. Put yourself financially first, not your Lord and Saviour. But if you can do that, that's absolutely fantastic. If you can't, that's also fine. But what you should definitely do regardless is give this video a cheeky little thumbs up and like it, subscribe to the Lord by Night channel, and share this video with any and everyone who loves what I do, and I'll see you on the next upload, wherever that may well be for you. And until next time, farewell.